Kieran Brady here. I just wanted to take this opportunity to again give credit to all involved at the Sunderland Community Soup Kitchen for all of the sterling work that they do throughout the year to aid and assist the vulnerable and needy throughout the city of Sunderland and surrounding areas. It's very sad that the people who are being asked to aid and assist such individuals come from the very same communities and often find themselves in situations which many would think of as deprived and impoverished. But it certainly seems to be the way that when care and concern is requested, it tends to come from people who have had shared or similar experiences, largely because those in the corridors of power often refuse to offer any such concern. So please, if you can and you're disposed to, then please assist the Sunderland Community Soup Kitchen. You will be able to find all of the relevant contact details and the GoFundMe page on the Roker Report. I wish you all a very, very Merry Christmas and a peaceful and prosperous 2023. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Chris Wynn. Welcome to the Roker Report podcast in association with the Sunlun Community Soup Kitchen. And once again, we have something a little bit special. Today we're talking to, in my opinion, one of the biggest characters in football, who during his time as a player and manager has claimed a First Division title. And just to confirm, that means the Premier League for some of the younger listeners out there. 3 Scottish Premier League titles, 2 European Cups, 3 Scottish Cups, 4 English League Cups, 1 Scottish League Cup, a UEFA Cup finalist, and he also won the Conference or the National League in today's money. There's many that I've missed that I'm sure he will remind me of. But to top it all off, he grew up feeling our pain as fellow Sunderland fans. And, well, actually, I think he actually possibly suffered more pain doing that than the rest of us, which we might touch on. And, of course, he went on to become our manager at Sunderland as well. So today we are privileged to be speaking to Martin O'Neill. Hello, Martin.
It's very nice, Chris. Thank you very much. Don't worry, I'll not be reminding you of there. Among some very, very good days, there have been plenty of poor days as well too. So,
well, I thought you might straight away mention the Anglo-Scottish Cup or something like that, or the home championship.
No. Well, strangely enough, why you should mention the Anglo-Scottish Cup, because it was a competition devised away back years ago, and it was Brian Clough's first trophy at Nottingham Forest. And this year, he must have done about 50 interviews after the first European Cup final, and he keeps mentioning the Anglo-Scottish Cup. He said that was, and I'll try and do the accent, not very good at it. And that was the first trophy, young man, that we put on the table. He said it's very, very important to have won something. So there you go. So whether it might not be top of our list, but certainly Brian Clough thinks about it a great deal of times, or did do.
Didn't that turn into the Texaco Cup, or it was the Texaco Cup before that, or something like that?
You might well be right, or no, it might have been the Texaco before that. I think Texaco came before I was actually in England, so I think that's right. It might have done, but this idea in Anglo-Scottish, which was essentially for the old that you would call championship teams now in the second division. So we won a couple of big matches against Ayr and Kilmarnock. And finally took her place and beat Leyton Orient in the final. I think it was over 2 legs. So, but listen, if it pleased the master himself, then it ought to please us.
Yeah, and I might be wrong, but I'm sure there was 1 or 2 years where Irish clubs got involved. But I don't want to get into that. Well, I could be on all day going through those bizarre and wonderful cups that went out of fashion. But I have to admit, at the minute, I'm more than disappointed you're not on our screens at the moment talking us through the World Cup that is being played out as we speak. But how are you keeping, Martin, in general? How are you keeping?
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going out now, funnily enough, to Kuala Lumpur, so to head out there, because there is a TV station called Astro, 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 who work out of Malaysia, and I do work for them intermittently, particularly when they're covering the Premier League here. But they've asked me to go out for the quarterfinals, semi-finals, and finals. So I think what I will do is I probably head to the quarterfinals and then just take a thought about it. It's not. It's just the length of time you're on a plane is the biggest problem for me. And even at my age now, I still don't like flying. So it's a long way away. But I'm doing some work for them. So it's not the British channels, but it's at least an opportunity to watch the World Cup in another environment.
Well, like I said, my early days, I was brought up on you, telling us how it was on these World Cups, and telling your fellow guests as well, putting them in their place and saying, I've got 2 European Cups on my CV. Never mind that World Cup business.
Oh, do you remember? Yeah, way back with Vieira and Cannavaro. That was years ago. But listen, all good fun at the time, I must admit. But right enough. But like everything else, you have to be asked to go on these stations, and so I don't really put myself out too much anyway. So that's the nature of it.
Yeah, well, like I said, I'm disappointed at that fact. But you do have a new book out. It's called On Days Like These, which is the story of your life in football, which, I mean, not just for any Sunderland fan, because obviously we're talking in the main to Sunderland fans, but for anyone pretty much who was remotely interested in football. For me, it's a bit of a no-brainer to add to that list to Santa in the lead up to Christmas, and even beyond Christmas, to add that book to anyone's collection. I've got mine right in front of me. I was showing you before. I devoured that in 2 days. It's genuinely a fascinating read, Martin.
Right? Oh, that's nice of you.
Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating. And towards the end, you mentioned how enjoyable it was for you to write it. But through writing it, was there any part of your career that you ended up thinking differently about after you'd actually put it down on paper? And one of the examples I think about was that first European Cup final that you maybe missed out on.
It's a very good question. And you're right. What I tried to do was write it, the particular chapters, to write it as that age. I'm trying to say, look, for instance, in childhood, trying to write it as a 7 or 8 year old. By the time I came to Nottingham Forest first as a young professional, in when I was 19, tried to write it like a 19-year-old, rather than thinking back, over the years and then writing it as an elderly gentleman. So from that viewpoint, but your point is taken. As you're putting it down, as you're writing it, sometimes you think, well, am I thinking now? What were my thoughts at that particular time? So for the most part, I think I've tried to capture how I thought at the time, as much as anything else. And in terms of reflections, yes, could I have dealt with situations differently? Absolutely. No question about that. You talk about the first European Cup final where myself and another player, very, very, very good player called Archie Gemma, both of us we'd been injured in the lead up to the European Cup final, and we had participated in the games beforehand. So we kind of felt that if we could get fit, then that we have a chance of playing. But in the meantime, Nottingham Forest had paid £1 million, first £1 million player for Trevor Francis, who was an exceptional footballer. So, and the rules at that time were, even though he was only eligible for the final, which was crazy, But anyway, and I think Brian Clough was always going to play him. Anyways, it turns out Archie and I didn't play. Clough said, I can't risk a couple of players going in without having trained for a couple of weeks, which is a fair point. When I look at it now, I can see a managerial viewpoint rather than a player. But that was really disappointing. And of course, the two of us, if you see archive footage of the two of us as the players are running around the pitch in Munich celebrating, you'd have thought that that there was deaths in the family with the faces that we have, So you just don't feel part of it, and and of course, Nottingham Forest are never going to get to another European Cup final, which we actually did. But at that particular moment, you think your chance of playing in a European final is gone. So hence the real sour face, I think, as much as anything else.
Yeah. Like I said, fascinating reading it. And I have to admit, I winced when you described how that medal dropped off the end of the table, but I'll kind of...
That was very briefly, that was when Brian Clough came in the dressing rooms afterwards. All the celebrations were just dying down a little bit. And then he realized that there was the only medals that were given out on the day were medals for the players. So he wanted to have a medal, or at least a medal cut. And then he was asking the substitutes to give up their medals. on that time. And I only was asking, could I show my medal outside to my family? And then I would give it back to him for to be cut. And when he refused that, that's when I threw the medal or the little box across the table. So to my eternal discredit now, but at the time, that's how I felt.
Well, as you described, I mean, funny enough, you start the book at the beginning, as you described. You kind of walk us through your school days, and you include a story describing how you got punished for your attempts to follow Sunderland's epic 1964 FA Cup quarter-final tie with Manchester United from a distance, which is what I was hinting at in the intro.
Absolutely. So what had happened, I was a boarder at school in St. Columns in Derry, which was, it was quite austere for boarders. And we had very, very few privileges, things to do. Very, very seldom would see any. Well, there was no football on, but on a Saturday when we come in, we still even had a school up until a half day on a Saturday. Then we would play Gaelic football. So by the time that we were coming in, the teleprinter, the only thing that we were ever allowed to see, the teleprinter was coming on, and the teleprinter was on that particular Saturday was showing Sunderland 3-1 ahead at the Old Trafford. And I thought, gee, this is fantastic. Going to be in the semi-final of the Cup. And remember, Sunderland's second division, a championship now. Then Manchester United got 2 late goals, goes to 3-3, replay at Roker Park. And John O'Hare, who was a young apprentice at the time at Sunderland, and I end up meeting at Forest, tells me about that unbelievable night when the barriers broke down, and he said it must have been at least 70,000 people in at Roker Park. And then I think it's Jim Montgomery kicks the ball straight out, I think, to Bobby Charlton. Bobby Charlton equalises 2-2 in the last minute, I think. And then eventually, after extra time, it goes to the third game. So this is where the points stick. So I have to listen to this third game. I know it's going to be on radio. So I get this little crystal set from one of my day boy friends, and I bring it in. So you're not allowed to have it. So by the time that we had said the rosary and all those sort of things that and finished late class, I nip up to my bedroom and I'm just hearing the bad news that Sunderland have been, even though they'd taken the lead at Leeds Road, Huddersfield. I think Dennis Law scoring a few goals that night. And just when the final whistle is going, the dean of the college comes in, sees me with these crystal set and he stuck them to my ear. I lose my privileges. I get slapped 6 times with a big black thing the following morning. And I thought to myself, is my pain the same as Charlie Hurley's? So, and I felt more for Sunderland. And my heavens, my hands were stinging for the whole day. That was but I have to say the pain was greater because Sunderland were knocked out of the FA Cup. And but listen, things work out eventually. They get promotion, and from the previous year where that Tommy Harmer, remember Tommy Harmer, I think scored a late goal up there when Chelsea beat Sunderland. Honestly, listen, and you can only be supporting Sunderland and having nothing but bad days, and then eventually, when I'm a professional player, and you don't have to have any other interest other than your own and the team you're playing for, there I am cheering them on against Leeds United in '73. So things work out well.
Yeah, I mean, just for people who might not be aware, I hope most are, especially the younger ones. But 1964, that quarter-final, in that first game, 3-1 up with 4 minutes left, and Bobby Charlton and George Best score in the last 4 minutes to make it 3s each. And like you said, at Roker Park, that epic night, I think the official attendance was 46,000, but it was probably double that.
Yeah.
And when you say the last minute, Bobby Charlton scored in the 120th minute.
120th minute, that's correct. That's absolutely right. Absolutely right. But John O'Hare, honestly, he said it was an epic night. The crowds going up to the game. It's it's just a throwback to that day. And Roker Park was something really special.
Yeah. Well, I'll come back to that. But I mean, just because in the book, and you've already touched on, obviously, you were going to those lengths to see what was going on in the world of Sunderland. But in the book, it's just a statement that Sunderland had just become your team. And you mentioned the love of, the likes of Charlie Hurley, you mentioned Johnny Cross, and those two in particular. But, I mean, I grew up with my dad in my ear, hammering home stories of Charlie Hurley, Brian Clough, Len Shackleton, Monty's save. But he made sure I understood. But for you, what was that hook that came all the way across to kind of Kilrea and pulled you into following Sunderland?
I think, well, very naturally, you as where I was born, Northern Ireland, if you're a Catholic or Protestant, it's either Celtic or Rangers. So that's a massive draw. But you have to have an English team growing up. So I was the only one in both primary school and in grammar school to support Sunderland, because Sunderland, I mean, fascinated with Charlie Hurley, obviously, and Johnny Crossan, who came from the very city of where I was boarding, Derry City, and so that was the connection. Strangely enough, I have a photograph of my Kilrea from the village I was in. That we had a Gaelic team then, an under-15 Gaelic team, and it's just this photograph. I came across it about a couple of years ago. It's an under-15 team taken at the time. And on the back, I've written down all the names of all the people who are in the photograph. And when I get to my name, I actually write Charlie Hurley as my name. So if that's more than a fascination, isn't it? Really. And it was delightful to hear that he was voted Player of the Century as well too, which is fantastic.
Yeah, that Charlie Hurley. I mean, it was 30 plus years after he retired, he got voted Player of the Century, which is pretty amazing.
Listen, the fascination with Sunderland became that, and the red and white, the striped shirts, and then of course I get the bubblegum cards as well too, so, and then I get the likes of Stan Anderson and people who get there. So yeah, just absolutely fascinated, and it seemed as if that the journey was always. It was going to be filled with agony, and I suppose there was a part of me loved that agony as well too.
With Sunderland, it's definitely kind of the beauties in the struggle and all of that sort of stuff. But I obviously want to get onto your time at Sunderland, but I can't speak to you without mentioning obviously those days at Nottingham Forest, because just completely epic days. I love reading around that period about Nottingham Forest. I mean, you were spotted by Nottingham Forest and came across to England, made your debut in 1971, I think, and I might be wrong with this one, but I think it was the beginning of the following season in September 1972, because I think Forest were relegated that previous year, that you first paid a visit to Roker Park as a player. And it was the year we won the FA Cup, but at this time it was Alan Brown who was still in charge, who was a big influence on Brian Clough and obviously brought him to Sunderland. And although there was just over kind of 14,000 there and you were on the wrong end of a 4-1 defeat, how was your first experience of playing at Roker Park?
I remember Matt Gillies asking Bert Johnson, who was our youth team manager and also was doing a lot of scouting for us at the time, scouting opposition. And he gave us such a report on Sunderland that I thought to myself, we better just not turn up here, because he said they were by far the best side in the division at the time. Now, Sunderland didn't go up that year, but he said they were by far the best footballing side. So I think by the time that we arrived at Roker Park, we were already 3-0 down, so, but they give us a hammering. And even though we actually beat Sunderland that season towards the end, I think their preparations in their mind were for Wembley as much as anything else, So, but my first visit to Roker Park, absolutely. And the interesting thing about it is that Alan Brown that you're talking about as the manager, he was the great stubborn manager of Sunderland, because that's the interesting thing when you mention, because a man called Alan Brown becomes our manager at Nottingham Forest. About a year later, as a Scottish international, won an FA Cup medal got in the final with Luton against Nottingham Forest in 1959. So a different fellow. No, Alan Brown, Brian Clough had a great regard for. Yeah. I mean, in many aspects, I think sometimes a grudging regard for him, because he was a real stubborn man.
It was only, I think it was about 2 months before he got the sack and Bob Stokoe took over, and then we went on that cup run. So yeah, I think it was one of Alan Brown's last jobs, I think, before he kind of
yes.
But you obviously go on, and Brian Clough appointed manager of Nottingham Forest January 1975. But it's funny because everyone says Brian Clough, Nottingham Forest, and immediately you switch on to European Cups, League Championships. But for the remainder of that first season, Forest really struggled, and I think you went 11 without a win during that time. And obviously you hear so much about Brian Clough and that kind of the bullish character when everything's going great. But was he any different during those type of spells when well, especially during that initial period when things weren't quite going so well.
Well, absolutely. And now I have to cast my mind back to these things, but that's true. Now, so what you had a Brian Clough arriving at Nottingham Forest there, obviously chastened a little bit by his 44 days at Leeds United. That had come to an abrupt end. So he had been this couple of months where he was in limbo, really. And then for Nottingham Forest, a second division side, to have this fellow who was, let's be fair about it, was a big figure in television, never mind football. I mean, he was on Michael Parkinson's show about every third week or something this year. So, and suddenly here he is arriving at that second division club just up the road from Derby. But your point I take entirely. We had obviously a charismatic character coming, and we won the first two games. We won at Tottenham Hotspur in an FA Cup replay. And then we won at Fulham in a league game. So we stayed these 4 days down at Bisham Abbey, down in near Marlow, village of Marlow. And those were great days. You're dead right. We didn't win another game. I think it's for 16 matches. Can you imagine in the current game now? But Brian Clough, in fairness, was unsackable at the time. His whole character would have been too strong for the board members to even think about it. But yes, you're right. We did see a change. He came in, first of all, he was saying to us, listen, don't worry about the results. He said, let me worry about that. You do the playing. And then after about 6 or 7 weeks, when we weren't doing the playing and not getting a result, his attitude was changing completely, and he became, I think, certainly a bit more aggressive in his team talks anyway, let me put it this way. But really, when his sidekick, Peter Taylor, arrived about 18 months later and came to the football club in around about June of 1976, that's when we genuinely saw a rejuvenated Clough. I'm not saying for 1 minute that he was morose. I don't mean that in that sense. But we saw a new character coming in again, and Peter Taylor was great for Brian Clough because he gave him this great self-belief. And again, Brian Clough would have survived. He would have prospered anywhere, but he just also, like some of us, we still need someone behind you to say, "Hey, listen, you're the man. You're great. I can deal with a couple of players coming into the football club." And Peter Taylor was a really good spotter of talent, but he was great for Brian Clough. So the two of them together, you just knew that something was really going to happen.
Is it too simplistic to say that they needed each other to create these successful sides at Derby and Forest?
No, absolutely no. I absolutely agree with you. I really do agree with you. And Brian Clough, for all his outward show of amazing confidence, could be introvert is not the right word, but he could be. He needed Peter Taylor as much as anything else. He needed them, and it sounds crazy to say that. And Peter Taylor obviously needed someone, a front man like Brian Clough, for the two of them to interact in a manner in which they did do. And it's really sad to know that that Peter Taylor eventually died before that they made it up. They fell out big time because Peter Taylor packed in at Nottingham Forest, and then the next thing you know, he had arrived at Derby County. That's a separate story. But the two of them together, absolutely, because they were brilliant.
I mean, and then just going towards the end of that your time at Nottingham Forest, I mean, it didn't end the way you would have liked, and that comes across in the pages, and it's clear in the book that it could have ended in a better way. But I mean, it doesn't seem to impact what you thought of and think of Brian Clough and Peter Taylor to this day, because when you read it on a page, some of the things that they did, especially in the transfer that could have possibly happened to Coventry and things like that it sounds pretty vindictive. But I guess football is a kind of different world to anything else in that respect.
It's a good point. Absolutely, yeah. I did, and I felt during the time that they could have handled the situations, particularly with myself, a bit better. But then they would be turned around and say, "Well, listen, you were a bit of a renegade, and you probably thought you were miles better than you were, and this was our way of pinning you to the floor, as it were." So I think a lot of those things maybe what had happened is that I I didn't turn up for a game because I wanted to play centre midfield, and the next thing you know, it didn't happen. I'd been playing wide right hand side for years, and I thought I could maybe do a job in there. Anyways, it turns out I was made substitute for this game. That's when I went in to tell them I'm not turning up for the match, which I must admit now, if any footballer said to me that as a manager, I would verbally lambast the same fella. So I actually see Brian Clough's side. And would you believe it? The game was called off the next morning, but Brian Clough made this special journey over to the city ground to see if I was on the bus. So I knew that I couldn't win from that minute onwards. And then, of course, then the last 5 or 6, 7 weeks were around about that time were particularly difficult. Even though he said to me, I'd done my punishment, as it were, and then I get on the plane to go to Tokyo for the World Club Championship, and I play in that game. But then I come back, and he said, "No, son, your suspension is still not finished. Get back home again." Crazy day.
Well, I am chuckling because I did read that passage, thinking if a player did that to Martin O'Neill, the manager, he probably wouldn't have even made the bench.
He would absolutely. That's the whole point, I must admit. And when I was putting this down, one of my daughters, 2 daughters, who was over my shoulder, kind of reading, she said, "Dad, how would you have felt yourself?" Absolutely, as a manager.
Yeah.
The
good stuff. And I mean, just on Brian Clough as well, I'm sure that he mentioned once or twice, I'm sure, his goal scoring record at Sunderland while you were a player at Nottingham Forest and he was the manager. He also said publicly, I think more than once, that it was his happiest time in football when he was at Sunderland. And this included, managing, teams that were winning titles, European Cups. I mean, did he ever know that you grew up supporting Sunderland? I mean, was that ever a conversation?
Well, it's a really strange thing when you think that, honestly, I know that in Boxing Day of 1962, when and you see that famous photograph of him lying down in the ground in a frozen Roker Park, and really when the game should never have been played for a start, and his career's finished, and honestly, and he had scored a bag full of goals up until then at that time, and I'm thinking, and it was the great freeze of 1963, but that was effectively his career over. Did I ever think when I was shedding tears over this young centre forward, or 28 or 29-year-old centre forward, being injured, and then suddenly Sunderland's chances of getting into the big division, were going to be curtailed because of it? Then did I ever think that this fella would cause me all sorts of anxiety and great days as well too? So absolutely, I did. One day. We were walking along the sands of, I think it might have been Benidorm, it might have been Mallorca. I'm not so sure. It was one of his February breaks. And I got a chance. He pulled me into his conversation. He had a couple of his brothers there with him at that time. So it was a little, as Brian Clough used to break off a lot of times during the course of the year, which we loved. I must admit, absolutely loved. And he would be a bit more relaxed as well too. And so I think that, and I don't think I'm making this up, but I think that was the time that I mentioned to him that I was a big Sunderland supporter, and that actually that day I remember vividly in 1962 when he gets injured, because the pictures come in the following day or the day after that there, and was Berry had beaten him, and I think Charlie Hurley missed a penalty as well too in the day. Certainly Sunderland missed a penalty in the game, and it was the first time that Sunderland had been beaten for 2 years. So he was amazed at a time that I knew these things, at the time. So, but did it change his mind about me? Not at all. Absolutely not. Absolutely not. He might have just said, "Hey, son, that's a really nice story." He said, "But just get on with the playing next week."
Yeah, he never forgave Bob Stoker.
No, he did not. He did not. He never did. You're dead right. Absolutely.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, after your playing days, you moved into management. You started off at Grantham Town, moved to Shepshed, and then Wycombe Wanderers. And one statement that kind of jumped out in the book was that you don't necessarily agree that it's a must for managers to start kind of learning their trade down in that lower leagues. But do you think the fact that you were forced to do it in that way, in many respects, that it gave you it almost gave you a better foundation in becoming a top manager because you were forced to do it that way.
Right. Okay. That's a very good point. I think, yeah, if for instance, I started when I met Peter Taylor by chance, and he said, I thought you would have gone into management. It was the first time I really thought about it. And so I started to apply for a lot of jobs. And if someone had said to me, "Oh, by the way, you go and manage, let's say, a side in the championship immediately," I would have taken that opportunity. The reason being is that because I always had this feeling that if I go down, okay, your results are not shown, you're not in the limelight. However, this idea of making loads of mistakes. Let's say I was the chairman of Bradford City, for instance, and then suddenly this player who had played at a decent level as a player, but was down in the Vauxhall Conference and can't win a game. Well, I'm not exactly going to be racing out to interview this fellow for my job. That was the point. So when I went down to Wycombe Wanderers, I felt this has to work. This really has to work for me because I might not get an opportunity. I might just go into the wilderness. And if we can't win games, then your name is never going to be about. And it was not. As I actually fell in love with Wycombe Wanderers, but I loved my time there. So it wasn't as if I didn't think immediately I'm looking at a stepping stone. But what I meant to say is that if I don't succeed, then the chances of managing at a higher level, I'd have thought that would have lessened. That's my point, and I still stick to it regardless of what happens. Would I have liked to have gone in as a manager of even Sunderland at an early age? Of course, I would have taken the chance with that. You definitely do, and here's the point that I think that you're probably right, and you do learn some things. You are a bit out of the limelight, but you still have to win.
Yeah. And obviously it leads to huge success with Leicester City, Celtic, Aston Villa. But just to touch on your time at Leicester from a Sunderland point of view, I was at both legs of the League Cup semi-final at Filbert Street and the Stadium of Light, 1998-99, that season. And Sunderland were flying at the time. We were breaking all sorts of records under Peter Reid on the way to the Premier League. It was because obviously Leicester were a Premier League side, and we were in the second tier. We were top of the league that season. But seeing that Leicester City side in the flesh in those two games was something else, because to this day, and I had the conversation at the time that I don't think I've seen a more organised team than that Leicester City side in those two legs, because we tried to do, we had these wingers and we had Quinn and Phillips and all this sort of stuff. And the other thing I remember from those two games was Tony Cottee. I always knew he was a good player, but in those two games he was incredible and scored 3 goals across the two legs, scoring all of Leicester's goals to take them through to the final. But the other thing I remember, those two were just they were great games as well, night games at Filbert Street and Stadium of Light.
Right. Okay. So we got to the Stadium of Light. You're right. For the first game, we play really, really well in the game, really well, and are in charge of the game for most of the time. Not for 1 minute did I think that this was going to be an easy run down at Filbert Street. Far from it. But honestly, I'll tell you something. We were overrun by Sunderland in the game, and Tony Cottee comes up with a big goal for us. Otherwise, it was a long evening. Honestly, Sunderland were fantastic in the second game, really fantastic. And I'm telling you, I'm speaking to you now, having got through. I was a really worried man at the time. So all that organisation you're talking about, I couldn't see as Sunderland were cutting through us so easily. And Tony, who had been probably in the autumn of his career, could still conjure a goal for us, and he did. Brilliantly to get the goal. Otherwise, we were in serious trouble. Well, let me put it this way: if he hadn't done that there, I believe that you would have been at Wembley and not us, honestly. So the second game was really difficult for us.
Yeah, well, with a bunch of centre halves like Walsh, Taggart, Elliott, Gilchrist, players like that,
you felt as if you had a chance. Elliott was he was actually a super player for us, because he could deal with the ball. He could very, very comfortable for a centre half, and could score a goal at either end if you need it. And funnily enough, the following year, the year 2000, he scored both goals in the League Cup final for us at Tranmere. So yeah, he was a handful, and you always felt as if you've still got a chance in the game. But that didn't stop Sunderland from running riot for about must have been, to me, you might think it was only for about 20 minutes. For me, it seemed about 87, to tell you the truth.
Yeah, Matt, I remember Matty Elliott being that emergency striker, but yeah, I mean, just a few years on, something you really briefly mentioned in the book was interviewing for the English national job in 2006. I mean, how was that experience interviewing for that, and how close do you think you ended up coming to getting the job?
That's a very good point. The people who've read the book said you seem to gloss over that. You just mentioned when you're talking to Doug Ellis, that you say that you mentioned about the England thing, and then I've had some people say, "Oh, I would like you to have elaborated on it," no, and it's probably very true. Maybe I felt at the time. Anyway, here was really how it came about. First of all, I had left Celtic because my wife's illness. And I'm fortunate enough to be able to take some time out. A lot of men and a lot of people and families can't afford to do that there. So in that aspect, I was kind of fortunate, but I realize that people have to, with illnesses in their family, they still have to go and work and have to do a lot of things. So I've got much regard for that. But anyway, so as she's getting better, then the chance. Then I probably wanted really to go back into club management as much as anything else. Maybe that was at the back of my mind. And also the fact is that, you feel that the England job is such a privileged position, and you feel as if you should be winning European Cups before that. You know what I'm saying? That you, as a manager, you feel as if that your entitlement really should be after phenomenal success as a manager, like 3 European Cups and 2 World Club Championships beside you. But in terms of the interview itself, I remember absolutely doing it at the time. Maybe interviewing sometimes with me becomes a bit of a problem. I either say too much or sometimes just clam up and say nothing. So I think that somewhere in between might have helped. And probably deep down, I maybe give the board members the impression that I probably maybe wanted to go back into club management. I think that there was something in that there. That was probably right. But yes, it was honestly genuine honor to be in the shortlist anyway at the time.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think how it turned out, I think most English fans probably wish you'd get in the job for a while. But I mean, the opportunity to become Sunderland's manager came in November 2011. Steve Bruce had just left the club, and again, you describe those early conversations in the book, and I mean, it comes across slightly reading between the lines. So you might have to see if I'm wrong here, but it seems like reading between the lines, you had initial concerns. But you kind of repeat that it was the pull of managing Sunderland in the book. But do you think if it hadn't have been the Sunderland job you were discussing at the time, and it was that discussion with Alice Short, but it was a random club, that the alarm bells might have been ringing and you might not have actually taken the job?
I know this for certain. I wouldn't have done it. No, I wouldn't have done it. It was the lure of Sunderland and wanting to come up to it. Niall Quinn at the time got in touch with me. He said, and I had an opportunity to or possibility of managing Sunderland sometime before that, and so it didn't happen. But this time, I remember Niall Quinn saying to me, I think it's your time. I think could do with you coming up. We're in a bit of trouble, and I genuinely I wanted to come. I wanted to manage the football club, and really, and it didn't matter. So that was heart ruling head as much as anything else. But even so we get up there. Our first, by the time that we played on the Sunday against Blackburn, we dropped into the bottom 3. But just to win that game, young Vaughan scoring that goal, which was fantastic, and for us to win the game. And then, even though we lost to Tottenham the following week, we started going a little bit of a roll. Won at QPR, won the games, won some matches, and soon we were out of trouble. But to me, the biggest disappointment was obviously not playing not playing at all against Everton in the quarter-final replay. That was the point. To see the fans queuing up at the Stadium of Light. Honestly.
Yeah, I'll come back onto that because that was a bit of a special night. But one thing I wanted to ask you about coming to Sunderland, because one thing you just straight away you said, right, well, I'm appointed Sunderland manager, but then you say the decision from John Robertson not to come with you after what happened with Aston Villa and come with you as your assistant. I mean, was that a surprise to you, but with the way Villa ended? But
No,
how much of
no.
was a blow for you?
John Robertson, Steve Walford were very, very important to me. And obviously, my goalkeeping coach, Seamus McDonagh, who I think is really just actually a brilliant goalkeeping coach, because he gets into the minds of the goalkeepers. And in actual fact, a lot of the goalkeepers still keep in touch with him for all the time. Both, a young lad that was a goalkeeper, obviously went on to Liverpool, and really goalkeepers at Aston Villa stay in touch with Seamus all the time. So they've really liked him as a goalkeeping coach. However, John Robertson, very, very, very important. John had fallen out of love with the game at Aston Villa in the latter stages. Not so much with players. He'd always had a decent, but I don't know what had happened. And John is at this minute, and it's not in the best of health, and maybe that was the start of things as well too. So he said himself, he kind of fallen out of love with the game, as he saw it then. And when I asked him about going up to Sunderland, he said, "Listen, Martin, you don't mind?" He'll politely say no, but that was it. And I actually knew that he wouldn't, because of the travelling. He was ensconced in Nottingham at the time, back in Nottingham. He had his own family at that stage to do, and I think it was a lot of those things. So I don't think he just really wanted to uproot again. And fine, absolutely. Did we miss him? Absolutely, of course we did. In the way that I think that Brian Clough would have missed Peter Taylor in many aspects. But that it didn't matter when John wasn't there. We started to win the games early. And I think that it certainly gave the owner a false impression of what we were like. That was my concern. And when he says at the end, when he and the lady chief executive come to me before we play Manchester United in the last day of the season, and says that the only player that we need to replace was Nicholas Bentner, I thought, whoa, wait a minute, I think we need a few more than that. And that was the point. And pre-season, we went down to South Korea, and I took a lot of the younger players there. And the truth is this year that it was only to verify what I knew before, that the younger players at the football club were not up to the task. And I don't think one of them in my time there has ever come through to play at a half decent level. I knew that at the time, trying to tell, what shall I say, the owner that we actually do need to invest. And the point is this: I thought I'd earned some brownie points, really, because I had not spent anything in the January transfer window. I took a couple of loan players, and thought. I thought, listen, we'll see this through, and I'll earn these brownie. In my mind, I thought I'll earn these brownie points, and so that if we stay in this division, we can relook at it during the close season. Then I felt that was the case. Listen, it sounds as if it's all one-sided, but
I want to kind of come back onto the running of the club, because I think it's accepted we're a bit of a basket case of a club at the top end back then, but. It's kind of pretty much, almost to the date, 11 years since your appointment at Sunderland, and being understatement to say at the time it was a popular appointment, because it was. I mean, everyone was behind the appointment, everyone was behind you, everyone wanted to make it work. But I mean, from going back to those days as a schoolboy trying to catch up with Sunderland, I mean, what was that like for you? 40,000 at the stadium, and you're in that dugout, and you have that last minute goal. Because, I mean, in the book, you kind of say it took your breath away, that kind of reaction to the goal and your first experience as manager of the club.
Well, if I could take you back, first of all, the moment that we scored the winning goal against Blackburn Rovers, but in a game that we probably really had to win, because, we had, as I say, that morning, we dropped it before the game kicked off. We were in the bottom three. And if we can't beat Blackburn Rovers at home, who were kind of semi-struggling themselves, then it's going to be a long time. But we got the 3 points in the board. But obviously, the epic game against Manchester City, just extraordinary. And for that alone, if I turned around and said, well, listen here, just to hear that enormous roar going up for that game. And in actual fact, throughout the game, because the crowds, sometimes, when you're in the Stadium of Light and the crowd are urging you on, and then the minute you put two passes going backwards, then there's a big, like most grounds, you go, oh. That particular day against Man City, because we had midfield players playing in full-back positions, we had all this here, the crowd were right behind you right from the start. And so every tackle that was made, every clearance that was made was roared. But for the winning goal, it was just, that was worth it. That was really worth it. If I could turn around, and I shouldn't, as a manager, you're supposed to talk about loads of games rather than one, but that was special. That was really everything. And that was something that I really wanted to try and recreate for most weeks, if it was possible.
And at one of the few occasions, you were glad that a player completely ignored your instruction, I think, with not taking it into the corner.
Absolutely right. He decides that, no, I won't. And I'm thinking to himself, will he do this? Not at all. I knew that because it's a funny thing, players, particularly young players, have no idea. Their thoughts in the game are totally different to the manager's thoughts, absolutely. And this idea that he could dribble and maybe even lose it, and Manchester City swarm all over us again, absolutely. And what does he do? He sticks it in the net, which was his big moment anyway. And I don't know where he is now, but honestly, that was brilliant. He did have ability. He did have nice ability. Just I don't think that he was particularly at that stage. I didn't think that he was physically equipped really to deal with the big league.
I don't think he was equipped to deal with the kisses he got when he ran into the crowd as well. But that's another story. But a couple of months later, your first experience of the time where your derby came up at St James's Park, and typical derby, 8 yellow cards, 2 red cards. Although I think Catmull's was technically after the final whistle. Ameobi equalised in the last minute to take a point for Newcastle. And, you've been involved in European Cup finals, Old Firm derbies, which is its own thing altogether. So how did the North East derby compare in terms of that intensity to other games you've been involved in?
Okay, right. It was really big. Obviously, I've been involved in the Old Firm games, Celtic and Rangers. But when that bus is travelling up to Newcastle, and the last 400 yards where the bus can hardly move, where the people are almost breaking down your windows and stuff like this here. There's actually, believe it or not, there is what shall I say, a frightening excitement about it all. It's just really great. And the bus pulls in, and about the 8 or 9 yards you still have to walk from that there into the sanctuary of St James's, and you feel, God Almighty, I can't wait to get into this dressing room as quickly as possible. But then obviously our fans are stuck up in the gods. I don't know if ever a stadium was designed to have fans closer to the angels than closer to the pitch. Is amazing. But anyway, for us to, and then we're leading in the game. We're doing really well in the match, really well. We're not only are we defending strongly and stoutly, but we look as if we're going to take the game. And then who was the wee lad that made a daft challenge in the penalty box? Fraser Campbell.
That's it.
And honestly, I could have mauled him at the end of the game. Seriously, he's got. I see it now, and I see it. Fraser, don't dive in. Oh, you just dived in. And it was really because we have the game won. You have the game won at there, and that was in a sense. I remember my feeling was possible bit of relief that we've got something out of the game at the time. 2, really, really disappointment because we should see the game through. And 3, where is that Fraser Campbell now to get him?
Well, you mentioned as well that FA Cup quarter-final replay against Everton, because it kind of goes back to what we were talking about your school days, listening into that quarter-final result in 1964, 50 years previous, and there's kind of parallels there, with kind of this quarter-final. I mean, did you take a minute to think, God, I was listening to this kind of 50 years ago, and now I'm involved in this?
Oh, absolutely right. Maybe I don't enhance that in the book, but absolutely, of course. And it was to see people queuing up for tickets, and I think this brings me back to those days, and where you see the black and white of people with their caps on and standing talking to each other, or whatever the case may be, waiting for their turn to get their ticket. Yeah, absolutely, it did. It was a real throwback. And having done really well, where we could easily have won the game at Goodison Park, and then to come up and think we're ready for this, and the crowd was ready for it. Everybody, you know what? Unfortunately, the people that is supposed to do the playing and managing, at the end of the day, just real disappointment. Genuinely, really, really, really disappointed just to have got to Wembley, regardless of what happens in the semi-final. And I'm not really a great believer in that the semi-final should be played at Wembley. It seemed the FA Cup has definitely lost a bit of luster along the way here, because there seems to be far more important things. But when I was growing up, the FA Cup might even have been more important than the league at the time, so that night for us not even to turn up was incredibly disappointing.
Yeah. You said at the end of the season you had that strange conversation. You'd only had 6 months in the job, but you finished 13th, 9 points above the drop, 7 behind Liverpool, who finished in 8th, actually. You reached the quarterfinal of the Cup, and then you had that conversation where they said they didn't think we needed to strengthen much. You managed to bring Adam Johnson and Stephen Fletcher into the club. But the impression, from the book that, that keeps coming across again and again in those Sunderland pages is that you were kind of fighting the tide from the hierarchy of the club, who were kind of fighting you almost in what you wanted to do with the club.
I have to say that is right. That's that was my not just a viewpoint. I would stand by that. Absolutely, it was a feeling there that the fight to get Stephen Fletcher in. I mean, if I say to you that I think the first signing I did, and it must have been around about this time, was actually Louis Saha, who was Louis Saha coming on a free transfer, who had retired from the game, who'd actually retired from the game itself and was probably lying on a beach somewhere at the time. And those are not what. And Louis Saha was a really fine player in his career, but that's not how you want to set off in the when the fixture list is out and the new season is almost upon you, and we. And just to compound issues as well, too, we can't play our opening game. We can't play our opening match at the Stadium of Light. And you know what? And you might think this is an excuse, but psychologically, even early on, you feel as if you're a game behind. And by the time that we did play that game, quite some months later, it didn't seem to matter anymore at that stage. So psychologically, you're fighting a battle. It seems here as if I do not want to come across here as an excuse maker at the end of the day, but it was Sunderland. It was definitely a big fight to get Stephen Fletcher on board, and as it turns out, Fletcher's goals certainly had a big part to play in the club staying in the league,
Yeah, and I mean, I like Bruce Springsteen as much as the next man, but not to cancel a football game, that there's limits to Bruce Springsteen.
There's limits, absolutely, absolutely. I love Bruce Springsteen, and I went to the concert. It's great, and he was great. But now I'm more concerned about the pitch underneath, and we need to have a surface to play on.
I mean, I haven't experienced that sort of chaos and what it was like at Sunderland at the time. Were you surprised at all that we ended up dropping like a stone like we did?
No, I don't. I mean, obviously, Paulo Di Canio came in and won that great game at St James's, which is terrific, and probably in essence those 3 points are enough to stay up. But from my own viewpoint, my disappointment was that we had 31 points in 31 games at the time. And I know one is not to know this, but another 5 points was going to be enough. And I'd have thought by my record that I would have got those points. I might not have won at Newcastle, but I think I might have been able to beat Stoke at home or something like this. Whatever way the results would have gone, I think we'd have got the points. And I've been hoping then that maybe that you get a chance to actually say to the owner, look, this has been a really, really tough season. If we're going to try and make this club the club that it should be, we've got to do something. And it's not the case of just spending money for the sake of spending money, but we've got to improve the standard of player at the football club. It really is as simple as that. So at the end of the day, that is really what I wanted to do, and what I did or tried to do at most clubs: improve players' performance by improving their mindset. This is the most important thing. First of all, the club in Sunderland, it might be in the northeast, it might be away miles and miles away from London, but at the end of the day, this is a historic club. You should want to play for it, and the players that you want to bring to the football club should be better than the ones that you have in there. That's the whole idea of it. So those things are, and to not get that chance, I suppose. Listen, It is what it is. Just, you have to win the games. The Canio comes in, then starts to complain the usual things. You start to complain, as all managers do, seemingly, the players are not fit enough. And then suddenly, when he's asked about his own fitness regime at the start of the next season, he says, my fitness is for Christmas time. Well done, mate. I don't know how you can get fitness for Christmas. You might not be there. As it turns out, he wasn't. So I get obviously angry with his particular comments, but that doesn't matter. It's the whole issue. Did you ask me a question? Did I think that they would drop like a stone? I was obviously hoping not, that they wouldn't do. Did I think that the caliber of player needed to be improved greatly to make a proper stab in the Premier League? Absolutely.
The clues are all there, because people like yourself, Dick Advocat, really successful managers, and they've proven they've got nothing left to prove. They've won things across the game. They know how to manage clubs. Yet at Sunderland, they can't. So the clues are there that there's something else going on that stops people from being successful.
That's exactly. But I wanted to disprove that. Really disprove that. Listen, that this football club is actually really worth fighting for. It is a big club, and people don't seem to realise that. Particularly, so players, for instance, who maybe think it's like let's say you're getting somebody from the continent who will feel that Sunderland is just like a stepping stone. Sunderland shouldn't be a stepping stone for these things. And it's easy for me to say this and pontificate away, but it's how I've always felt about it. And to get 15 or 16 months to try and put something right, it was not what I envisaged anyway, setting out in the place. Obviously, I had got these. As you set out to go, you have these dreams that you want Sunderland to be competing, and just not occasionally, but being up there, being a top 6 side in the division, trying to break through, and something that that had been lost a little bit at Aston Villa, and that was able to revive them in that sense. And I felt I could do the same at Sunderland. So to be pitched in with other, as you say, other really good managers, and say, well, what is it? Is there a hoodoo about Sunderland? Absolutely not. No, Sunderland's not a hoodoo at all. It's given you need a little bit of time, you need a little bit of something, and eventually, 15 or 16 months. I was massively disappointed when the owner said, "No, listen, we're making a change."
Yeah, I mean, just quickly on Sunderland in our current state, because we started talking before we started recording, but we've got relatively new owners doing things slightly different way, bringing in a lot of young players to the club. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to see us in action on the TV much this season, but I'm just wondering what your thoughts are on the fact that we've finally managed to get out of League One, and we're trying to establish ourselves once again as a Championship club.
Yeah, well, I went to Wembley because I had a big interest in both teams, Sunderland and Wycombe Wanderers, and to see the number of Sunderland fans that turned up for that game. And funnily enough, about 3 or 4 nights ago, I was in Glasgow, and this young fella come up, and I was doing this little Q&A. And fellow come up and said he was a big Sunderland fan, and the best day of his very young life was the game against Wycombe Wanderers at Wembley. So there you are. So, and he had to be very young. So yeah, you're watching the thing from a distance. They've got some really exciting young players playing in the side, and it's a tough old league to get out of. But and I suppose there's an element that when you get promotion, first of all, no matter how big you are, that sort of stabilizing. But if you've got an opportunity to push on, you've just mentioned beforehand about the home record. If you start improving the home record, there's no doubt that even with first year trying that to make the top 6 should be the ambition. Now, I mean, I don't for 1 minute want to put any sort of pressure on a manager. The last thing I would want is somebody telling me that where my football club should be. But Sunderland, it looks it looks and it looks as if it's on the up, but overall, yeah, the club looks as if it's heading in the right direction.
Yeah, I think I've just about recovered off that Wembley weekend. I think just about that. But your last managerial job was Nottingham Forest back in 2019. You've now finished your book. That's out there for the world to digest, and you sign off by saying you're looking forward to the next chapter. So, what might that next chapter involve?
I didn't know whether it was the next chapter of the book or the next chapter of one. But I mentioned that you mentioned Forest about 15 or 16 months ago. Well, if I definitely known that I was going to get 19 games at a club that I'd spent 10 years as a player, I definitely wouldn't have turned up for that one, particularly since we won the last 3 games of the season. But no, so the chief executive, the Greek chief executive, pulled me in and said, the way you want to run the football club is not the way we want to run it. So fine, okay, not a problem. So again, and not having spent a penny at the club, I came in January time. Listen, sounds everyone to their own. The great thing about owning a football club is you can make the decision. You can make whatever decisions you want. And so that's the case. But we'll honestly, we'll see what develops. I enjoyed doing the book, I must admit. I've thoroughly enjoyed this morning. Thank you very much indeed. And listen, we'll see what happens, you know.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, it would be great to see you back paying us a visit to the Stadium at some point. More so if it's a social visit. We don't want you in the away dugout, by the way, planning our downfall.
No, absolutely. And I've been meaning to do that, honestly, in the last 2 years. But I just had to go. I had to go to Wembley for the game, you know. So, and that if we'd been able to have beaten Everton and even got to the semi-final, that would have been nice to got to Wembley there just to see the crowd in it. But listen, you know, League Cup final against Manchester City happened afterwards, so you know, there was something to be looking forward to.
We could always dream it might happen again in my lifetime, but we'll see. But on that note, I just want to say it's been an absolute privilege and a pleasure and a joy to speak to you today, Martin. I'm sure all Sunderland fans out there wish you all the best for whatever the next chapter might hold, and thank you very much for your time.
Not at all. Really appreciate it. Thank you very much. Enough about my fascination with the football club.
Good stuff. Hopefully we'll see you soon. And thanks again to everyone listening. Firstly, go out and buy Martin O'Neill's new book. As I said, absolutely fascinating. And secondly, please donate to our Christmas fundraiser for the Sunlun Community Soup Kitchen. They make every penny go a long way, and anything you can donate will make a huge difference. All the information is on the website. We thank you for your generosity, and keep checking out the website for all the ways you can help us hit our target on that front. But from us, it's bye for now.